All right, let's just give it a second so that folks can start filing in here. All right, hello and welcome to Next Chapter Booksellers. We're happy that we could all be here today. I know a bunch of folks were planning on being here in person. We are grateful that you are still here in our new virtual setting. And if you weren't able to be here in our person and now you're able to be here in virtual, very happy to have you here. So if you guys can tell us in the chat where you are tuning in from. One of the things I really love about doing virtual events is being able to reach an audience. Sometimes we get people in California, sometimes we get people in other countries. So yeah, just tell us where you're coming in from the chat. All right. So also a lot of you guys already bought a copy of the book. If you haven't picked yours up yet, they're at the store waiting for you. At the end of the event, you'll be automatically redirected to our store's page where you can subscribe to our newsletter, buy a copy of the book. You could buy Lightning Strike. You could also buy Wolf Kill. And there's a lot of other suggestions that we have on our page that you guys can look at. Subscribe to our newsletter for upcoming events and pre-order promotions. We've got a lot of those going on right now, and it's a really good time for books, and it's a great time to get them soon. Holiday season will be upon us before we even know it. And so you can start thinking about which books you want to read and which books you want to share. And I am going to pass it off to our speakers tonight. So we've got William Kent Krueger with his new book, Lightning Strike. And he will be with Cary Griffith, who has done Wolf Kill. And so these are both well-renowned local mystery writers, and we're super excited to have them both here.
Thanks very much, Riley. Are you going to introduce me or what, Cary?
No, sure. Sure. I have to say, I mean, you know, Kent, you don't need much introduction, but I do want to say a few things about you that people may not know. First, I met you, I think, about 2 decades ago. You probably don't remember this, but
I think I know what you're going to tell me.
The National Writers Union, a monthly meeting of the National Writers Union.
That's right.
Yes, and you came, and gracious John Torn and I were putting those meetings together, and we asked you to come in and speak to us. And you graciously agreed to and brought some of your books. I want to say that you probably had only put out about 5 or 6 of the Cork O'Connor series.
Yeah, I was still a newbie.
Yeah, well, relatively, yeah. But one of the things I think people may not know about you is how generous you are to, you know, the not only I think financially. I think I remember you telling me once you donated most of your speaking fees to charities, but I know you've done benefits for the Anishinaabe and Ojibwe people to raise funds. And, you know, and when I say generous, you've been really generous with the Minnesota writing community. You know, you do things like come to our National Writers Union meeting, and you spearheaded early on. There was a group you put together a group of mystery writers, and you wore that prison guard. What was that called, you guys?
Sure, we call ourselves the Minnesota Crime Wave.
Yes.
Consisted of me, Ellen Hart, and Carl Brookins, and you're right, Cary. We dressed in costumes. Carl wore a gangster outfit, and he carried a plastic Tommy gun. Ellen Hart was our gun mall, and she dressed the part and always had a cigar stuck in her mouth, which she hated. It was odious. And I wore a prison outfit. You know, it was it was theater, and it was so much fun. It was to promote our work.
It was such an example of you reaching out to colleagues, and it's just like this. You know, I'm honored and privileged to be here speaking with you, and I really, really appreciate it. I should say miigwech.
Oh, good, miigwech. Yeah.
Don't exhaust that about exhausts my Ojibwe.
Well, it comes pretty nearly to exhausting mine as well. The the language of the Anishinaabe Moan or Ojibwe Moan is an incredibly complex language. And although I will often put Ojibwe words or phrases in my work, I honestly do not speak the language. It has been compared to Mandarin Chinese as the second most complicated language on the face of the earth, next to Mandarin Chinese. And it is a complex, rich language, but I have not learned how to speak it.
Boy, that's surprising because there's a lot of that in Lightning Strike. A lot of phrases.
Do you know, one of the things early on that I decided I was going to do, I've had readers for a very long time write to me and say, could you please put a glossary in the books or on your website somewhere so we have an explanation for all of the Ojibwe words or terms that you use. And, you know, this is what I've always tried to do when I use an Ojibwe phrase or an Ojibwe word is, as soon as I've used it, I try to give an explanation of the word. Because when I'm reading a book and there's a foreign phrase or something like that, I go, okay, foreign phrase, tell me what it means. And that's enough, you know, so that's where I come down. Someday I may actually put together a glossary. We'll see. But let me introduce Cary Griffith to those of you who don't know Cary. Cary is he's an incredibly fine member of the writing community here in Minnesota. He currently writes mysteries, but probably is working on other things besides those. Last spring, the first novel in his Sam Rivers series was released, Wolfkill, which he asked me to read and if I liked it, give a dust jacket quote for, what maybe people call a blurb. And I was so relieved that it was a great book. And I could give you a really great blurb for that. I thought it was a terrific novel. But in addition to that, to the crime writing you do, you are also an award-winning nonfiction writer. You've got, what I think, 3 nonfiction books, Gunflint Burning. I think you need to update that one now, considering what's going on in the Boundary Waters. Oh my God. Lost in the Wild, which is stories of these guys who went out into the wilderness, got themselves lost, and how they managed to survive. A terrific story for anybody who loves the wilderness. And the writing is so taut in that, Cary. Nicely done. And then Opening Goliath, which is about this incredible cave in southern Minnesota that I guess nobody knows about except you and the few divers who have got spelunkers who have gone in to explore it. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. It's actually the DNR owns it. They've declared it an SNL area, and a scientific and natural landscape, I think it's called. And yeah, people don't really, they've barred it off for, you know, I think legal reasons. So not a lot of people get into that Goliath cave. It's an interesting place.
Where approximately, for those of you who are listening who are, you know, amateur spelunkers, where approximately is this cave?
Well, if you know where Mystery Cave State Park is in Forestville, down by Spring Valley, it's about 6 miles from Forestville, from Mystery Cave State Park. So it's really close. In fact, they think Mystery Cave is, eventually they connect up somewhere. They haven't quite figured out that, because Mystery Cave is one of those striated, it's got a lot of striated channels and stuff in it. So it's, you know, but at some point they'll figure out how to get from one to the other.
So if you haven't discovered Cary's work, this is a perfect opportunity. Check in with the next chapter. I'm sure they carry all of your work, and buy one of Cary's.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You told them I was a generous guy. There, I just proved it.
Yeah.
So what do you want to talk about now?
Well, I'll tell you what I want to talk about. What these good people queued in for. This book. This is such an outstanding book. I have to say, you know, I honestly, I haven't read all the William Kent Krueger books,
There are so many of them out there, Cary.
Well, this is number 18. Yes, there are a lot out there. I've read several of them, but this one I think was my favorite. And it was my favorite for a variety of reasons. You know, I think two of my favorite novels are Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, which are not Cork O'Connor novels. But, it wasn't lost on me that you sort of formatted this in a similar way. And I really think it's definitely a Cork O'Connor novel, but this sort of has that same feel as This Tender Land and Ordinary Grace. I mean, both of those novels were historical. Lightning Strike is historical. You began both of those novels in the same way. You had sort of this elegiac page or two and said, long ago, this story. You do.
Isn't that the way all great stories begin?
Oh,
a long, long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Exactly. And I have a visceral reaction sometimes when I read really good writing, and the hair stands up on the back of my neck or my arm, and all three of those books do that for me periodically throughout. And so I really enjoyed or Lightning Strike. And I could ask you some questions about this, but probably the most specific with regard to what I just said was, I think this, it was great to see Liam and meet Cork's father and learn more about him. But you're really interested in that sort of, this was set in 63. This Tender Land was in the 30s, and Ordinary Grace was 61, I want to say. Yeah, but all in Minnesota. And you're really you really like that time and setting and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about what compels you to write about that period, that historical period in Minnesota?
Sure. In terms of time, it's just pure nostalgia. I wallow in nostalgia like a lot of people my age. Well, it began with Ordinary Grace. And so one of the reasons I said Ordinary Grace in the summer of 1961 is I had been looking for a story that would allow me to go back and recall an important period in my own life. The summer I was 13 years old. For those of you who hadn't read Ordinary Grace, the narrator of Ordinary Grace, Frank Drum, is recalling the summer he was 13 years old. And I wanted to go back and recall that summer and use bits and pieces of my own life, my own experience, my own perceptions to create this story. So that was really my first foray into the past. And I so enjoyed that experience, recalling all of these important emotions, important perceptions, things that influenced the rest of my life, really. That was such a terrific experience. And I so liked writing in the voice of a 13-year-old kid. That was just, it felt very natural for me. And then when I created This Tender Land, because I'd had such a wonderful time in the writing of Ordinary Grace, I decided I'm going to use the same structure. So we start off with a prologue, an older person recalling a younger period when they were younger, and then we pick up the voice of the 12 or 13-year-old kid. And we hear the story then through both of those narrative voices. And when it came time to write a Cork O'Connor novel, the reason I wrote Lightning Strike, this prequel, for those of you who have no idea what Lightning Strike is, it is a prequel to the Cork O'Connor series. It picks up Cork in the summer that he is 12 years old. And I'm giving nothing away by saying it's the summer before his father, who was sheriff of Tamarack County, is killed in the line of duty. And what Lightning Strike has allowed me to do is explore that important relationship that Cork and his father particularly had. So when I was thinking about this, I got to tell you, my agent has been pressing me forever to write a prequel, because I very often in my stories have alluded to events in the past in Cork's life, events with his father, with his family. And she wanted me to be able to explore that more deeply. And so finally I gave into that. And so writing Cork from this 12, 13-year-old perspective, once again, was a really easy thing for me to do. I've said this before, Cary, I'll say it again. It's easy for me because I am a firm believer that guys never mature much past 12 or 13 years of age. We're stuck there in our adolescence. So this was yet another really satisfying creative experience for me.
And you know, that the relationship, not only between, what really was intriguing to me, the relationship between not only Cork and Liam, his father, but those boys that he goes around with, Billy, what's his?
Yeah, I'm having trouble with that one too. Billy.
I forget his last name, but Billy.
Let me see if I can figure this one out.
And his buddy Jorge. You know,
Jorge.
yeah, that it was, you know, I was so happy. You know, when I was young, we had adventures just like those guys did, and we'd go out and we'd camp out overnight. And of course, I mean, they're on the edge of the Boundary Waters, and it's this huge wilderness, and it's a little bit different, but you did just a wonderful job. And that's one of the things that I really liked about this book, that you handled the boys and the characters so well. I would ask you another, if we can digress for a sec.
Hey, you're in charge here. You do whatever you want to do.
Okay. You know, you begin this book a little unusually with this is before the prologue, where the guy says, you know, where Cork O'Connor has just been appointed sheriff, and he's thinking about this summer long ago, right before his father gets killed in the line of duty. You begin it with an author's note, and you talk about the Indian Relocation Act of 1956. And, you know, when I read the book, it comes up periodically. I don't think it's ever mentioned by name, Indian Relocation Act, but you do a wonderful job showing the impact of that act. That act, by the way, if you haven't read the author's note, apparently the Congress thought it was spending too much money on reservations, and so they set up a situation in which they told Native people on reservations that they would pay to relocate them to nearby urban areas where they would get them housing and
not necessarily even nearby urban areas. Very often they were quite a distance away.
Yeah, and that is in the story. And then they get stuck back there, and they basically, what it does, and you said this in your author's note, it further disintegrated the Native communities. And, you know, with regard to the book, I read that and it came through, but not in, you know, you weren't preachy about it or anything. You just told the story of the stuff, and you could see how it impacted their lives with Billy, and Jorge actually ends up going back to LA. But I'm curious, what was the genesis for this book? I mean, I know you said your agent wanted you to go back and do a early one with Liam and his father, but it seems to me that was a pretty big theme in the book. And was that what you really began with, that Indian Relocation Act of 56?
Yeah, it actually did begin with that thinking. I have a friend in the Ojibwe community. He is a policeman with the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe police force, a wonderful guy named Monty Frank. And I knew nothing about the Relocation Act until Monty told me about it and explained the devastating effect that it had on Native communities. In fact, some Native communities vanished because of the act. Basically, the entire population left and didn't come back, and it created an enormous divide in many communities because those families who chose to leave were looked on not particularly kindly by those who chose to stay. And if families came back, it was difficult for them to reintegrate. It was yet another effort by the white majority to get rid of Native communities, you know. And it had really a devastating effect. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, you talk about that, and then you see the impact on the community in your novel, and I'm reminded of what's going on right now. I don't know if you thought about that at all, but you know, the teaching of critical race theory. It seemed to me the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 was very much a kind of Jim Crow law. I mean, there are no African Americans in your book, but it seems like the same thing going on to me.
The law has been used so many times, and you know this, Cary, so many times in the past to justify really horrific policies. And this was just another example of it. Yeah. So back to lightning strike, that's really where my thinking began. Um, but one of the things that I really wanted to talk about is how, depending upon your perspective, how you view an event is very different. And so in lightning strike, we have a significant death that looks like one thing, and the white community is willing to accept it as one thing, and maybe another, and the Anishinaabe of the Iron Lake Reservation view it an entirely different way. And it's that conflict in how you look at every event that's really one of the things I really wanted to get at in this story. And so I needed to create some really kick-ass mysteries to put at the heart of this story to make that happen. But a lot of it is I just want people, I wanted people to think while they were reading this and to come away thinking about the effect of the Relocation Act, this really stupid policy. I wanted them to think about, well, how we react to something really does, in fact, depend upon our own biased perspective. And as cultures come into conflict, we need to be aware that other people see things and believe things in an entirely different way than we see and believe. And it doesn't mean anybody's right or anybody's wrong. And we need to, embrace the possibility that there's something different going on that either of us see. So you're right. It's really a complex book. There's a lot going on in it.
Well, with regard to there are a lot of twists in the plot and stuff. And that was one question I had. I mean, did you, I think I've asked you this question before at a completely different venue. Are you a pantser or a plotter? Meaning, do you write by the seat of your pants? Is there a really compelling image or a character? In this case, you wanted to explore the relationship between Cork and Liam, and it's really a Cork coming of age story too.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of really interesting and unexpected twists in the plot. And I wondered if you had sort of scoped that out ahead of time.
This was the first novel that, typically when I write a Cork O'Connor story, I think they're generally speaking mysteries. And as I am fond of telling audiences, a mystery is a very tightly woven fabric of storytelling. Everything depends so significantly on everything else. And I think that the success of a mystery depends largely on the timing of the reveals. When do you give the reader the clues that are going to be necessary for solving the mystery or mysteries at the heart of the story? So typically, when I write a Cork O'Connor story, I think that story through as completely as I can before I ever put my fingers to the keyboard. And so at the end of that thinking process, I know how it begins, I know how it ends, I know who did what to whom and why, I know the themes I want to build through it. I was a little vague in moving into the writing of Lightning Strike. I had a sense of what I wanted the structure to be. I wanted the structure for a long time to appear to be one thing, and then we begin to understand that it's something else entirely. I wanted it to be a structure that would allow conflict to rise naturally out of the different perspectives. And I wanted to make sure, because every good mystery has lots of twists and turns, that I was able to yank the reader's chain a few times, And so I had an idea of where I was going, but as I was writing it, things came to me and it altered. Things came to me and it changed, which is not typical of a Cork O'Connor story for me. So it was kind of a hybrid of having an idea and flying by the seat of my pants.
And is that how you approach writing a novel?
Well,
Kind of a combination of both.
No. With Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, it was a very different kind of process. I wanted a very different kind of process for those two stories because they're very different kind of stories from the Cork O'Connor series. Going into Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, I only knew 3 or 4 salient elements that were going to be a part of the story. And I sat down to write, knowing that I wanted to have these elements play an important part of the story. And I let the story reveal itself to me. It was very much the pantser approach. But I wanted something that was organic, that felt organic, because these were stories that came from a different place, really, than my Cork O'Connor stories. They came from my heart and from my own experience. And I wanted the reader to feel that. When I write a Cork O'Connor story, it is a structure. And so I build the structure carefully so that everything fits. And in the end, you see all of the logic in the structure. And hopefully I've done a good enough job so that there is emotion involved as well. But that's a very difficult and very different kind of process than I followed with Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land, which I have to tell you, honestly, were two of the easiest stories I've ever written. Go figure.
Yeah, that's incredible because I love those novels and highly recommend them to anybody who hasn't read them yet. You know, another thing that I'm always intrigued about is that you do such an outstanding job conveying spirituality. You know, native spirituality. Was your dad a minister?
No, but his twin brother was.
Oh.
But his twin brother was not a tremendously spiritual guy. He was kind of a holy roller minister.
Oh, well, I was, you know, I'm curious about how you really explore that whole Ojibwe Anishinaabe spirituality, the Native American spirituality, and it's really interesting too. You know, you mentioned earlier the different perceptions that people have of the same event. And, you know, Cork has a very different perspective about some of the spiritual instances or things that happen out at lightning strike this location that you write about, and particularly at night, than his dad does. You know, and I you know, so I'm interested in those two things. You have a real comfort writing about that stuff, and I wonder where that comes from. And also, why the different sense of spirituality between Cork and Liam?
Let's talk about just the general sense of spirituality, particularly in the Cork O'Connor novels. If you write about the Native community, it's difficult not to include spirituality, their spirituality, as a part of what you're writing about, because at least those Ojibwe I know, particularly those who still live on reservations, or have significant attachments to reservations, are deeply spiritual people. There is a connection with their understanding of all of the elements of life, which go way beyond what we see with our eyes and hear with our ears, is just a natural part of their culture, how they perceive the world, how they approach the world. And I have such great respect for that. We give a lot of lip service, you know, in a white community to spirituality, but we don't really, often enough, I think, allow ourselves to believe in the spiritual path and all that offers us. And so many of my Native friends do. That's really a significant part of their life. And so I just try to bring that into the stories that I write. And for me, you know, Cary, I'm on a spiritual journey, and I think you are too. I think everybody watching here is on a spiritual journey, whether you embrace that or not. And it's just been a natural thing for me to include in the stories that I write. For the Cork O'Connor series, I began really allowing that to come out early on. In Ordinary Grace, one of the reasons I wrote Ordinary Grace was I wanted to be able to speak more specifically to the importance of the spiritual journey in our lives. And with This Tender Land, when I began writing that, I knew that the spiritual journey was going to be one of the significant elements in the story. You know, that's a story of kids on a river, and as a storyteller, I love rivers because they can be metaphors for so many things. And in This Tender Land, it's certainly a metaphor for the spiritual journey that Odie O'Banion, the narrator, is on. Does that help you there, Cary?
Yeah, it does. And I actually, it's the part of the reason I asked that is because it's one of the elements of the Cork O'Connor series that I really like. When you talk in Lightning Strike about Big John and he comes back from the war and Henry Malou takes him and he comes back from the war and he's a heavy drinker because of what he's seen and experienced in the war, and he heals himself by going up to Moose Lake, going into the Boundary Waters. That really speaks to me. That really resonates with my sense of the world, and that is really sort of the thing I like exploring in writing. And one of the reasons that I absolutely love that Boundary Waters area up there, because I think it's sort of a spiritual landscape.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And so many of my my native friends talk about how um, going back to traditional ceremonies and doing them in a traditional location, particularly out somewhere where their connection with nature is really profound, is such a healing experience. And you just know this in your soul. You don't have to be told this. You know this is true in your soul.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Oh,
Um,
but so in terms of how Liam O'Connor views some of the events in the story, when there are things that occur that are inexplicable, at least in Cork's belief system, and how Cork responds. What I was trying to get at is Liam is a cop. He sees things in a factual way. Show me the facts. Give me the facts. I base all my judgments on facts. Things happen in this story that are outside his ability to see factual evidence. And for a very long time, he can't accept that. Whereas Cork, who, listens to his grandma Dilsey, who's full-blood Ojibwe, and his mother, he's a part of the community, the native community. He is more than willing to embrace the otherworldness of these experiences.
yeah, that really came through, and I thought that was beautiful the way you, because we've gotten to know Cork over the years and seeing how he was rooted in that, and then comparing it to his dad. It's almost like um, his dad represents law and order and the white universe and stuff, and Cork has one foot planted in both places, and
Yeah.
that really came through.
And this is the first time Cork is beginning to understand that because he has a foot in two different heritages, he's viewed differently by both communities. He begins to understand that white kids are calling him things behind his back that he's never heard before. That there are adults out there who are speaking about his family in a way he's never heard before. And in the Ojibwe community, his family is viewed with skepticism because of the mixed marriage.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff comes out, like Duncan McDermott, one of the characters in your novel. He says some really nasty things. He's a real nasty guy, and he's a big employer, but he won't hire any Native Americans, and I mean, it's just, you really bring that stuff out as well.
Which is not an uncommon, hasn't been an uncommon
No,
situation. Yeah,
no.
not hiring people who are native because you have all kinds of preconceived notions about them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well,
Let's talk a little bit about Minnesota as a setting for our work because we both use Minnesota significantly. And I can tell you why I use Minnesota significantly. Talk about your own connection with Minnesota because you really, I love that. I love that author photo of you. You're out there in your flannel shirt out there in the wild. You really look like a guy who just stepped out of hiking in the Great North Woods. So talk about your own connection with the outdoors here.
well, all of the books I write are set in Minnesota, the nonfiction and fiction, but they all share, that love of wild places, that love of wilderness, and that I get back to that character in Lightning Strike, Big John Many Deeds, and he healed like so many of the characters in your novel, particularly the native characters. They healed by going into that landscape. I think the first time I went up to North, I was born and raised in Eastern Iowa. And in the ninth grade, a buddy of mine bought when I was 16. His family bought a cabin up on Lake Vermilion.
Ah,
And it was the first time I'd ever been up there. We went up there. I think we got in, it was an 8-hour drive. We got in overnight, and I was blown away. When I woke up the next morning, I got up early, and I liked to fish back then, and I, was casting lures, and it was just so startlingly beautiful. I mean, I kind of think of a spiritual landscape.
mm-hmm.
All that water, water, as you mentioned, rivers, water, lakes, ponds, streams, whatever, they can mean a lot of different things. A lot of, I think Jung thought water, if you dream and that you dream about water, drowning or being up to your neck or something, it relates to the unconscious in some way. And
I thought it was sexual, but that guy could be
well,
having misinterpreted that.
but yeah, I've always loved, it's not only that, I think if it's a wilderness area, I'm interested in it, the wild, because of the renewal that I think you can experience in places like that.
Your senses, I think, are heightened when you're out there because you're not assaulted. You are offered, you are graced with these incredible smells. You're graced with all of the textures that are around you. You're graced with what you see in the sky, day and night, with what you hear coming from the trees, the birds, the sound of water running. All of these things are just they're beautiful. And in the city, you hear buses and you smell the exhaust and you hear people screaming at one another and all of that. Out there, it's an entirely different world. And I think it's much easier for what's deep inside you to connect with the truth of the things that you experience out there.
Yeah. And not to be Pollyannish about it. I mean, there's predators out there that can kill you. I mean, grizzly bears, and I think moose kill more people in Alaska than grizzly bears. But I think that's part of the reason that you feel that heightened sense when you're out in wilderness areas, and why it makes it so much, you connect with it on a different level.
All of the predators in the books that I write that are out in the boundary waters walk on two legs, Cary.
True enough.
Yeah, I write about Minnesota. I'm not native, like you, I'm not native to Minnesota. I didn't move here until my wife and I were both about 30 years old because she was accepted to the U of M Law School. And the first time we went up north, we went up to stay in a YMCA camp north of Ely, a place called Camp du Nord. Do you know Camp du Nord?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which for those of you who don't know, it is literally across the road from the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. And I just fell madly in love with the place. And I'd been casting around for something to write about. I needed an anchor. And when I saw that place, I knew, okay, this is what I'm going to write about. And best decision I ever made.
I guess, with regard to going back to the Anishinaabe people and stuff that you write about, and you said earlier that you have an acquaintance, a friend who's in law enforcement up
Yeah,
on
he's a cop on the Mille Lacs Reservation.
Henry Malot, one of the great characters. I love, and I'm not alone. I've talked to other people, and they love Henry Malot for obvious reasons. Do you know any Medays, or I mean, how did you create Henry Malot?
Do you know the Medays that I know, members of the Grand Medicine Society, are young people who are embracing once again so much about their culture. For a very long time, if you were a member of the Grand Medicine Society, if you were a Meday, you were kind of looked on as a witch. There was a period of time where that was a perception in the Native community, but I know a number of young Ojibwe people who have in fact become Medays. They're embracing that again. Henry, where Henry came from, well, he's the nearest thing I write to a stock character, the wise old medicine man. Henry is he is wise, and he's brave, and he's compassionate, and he's funny. And at 105, he farts a lot. I've done my best to make Henry a believable character, and at the same time use Henry as a spokesperson for so many of the truths that I've come to believe about the world. And Henry somehow has become just this very natural vessel for me to speak through. I know he exists. I don't have a Henry Malou in my own life, but I know he exists because I've had so many Ojibwe readers, native readers, write to me and say, "Oh, that's our elder so and so." They relate to Henry quite well.
Oh, that's wonderful. Um, yeah, that he's a wonderful character. And even though he's 105, I mean, some people live to 120, Kent.
There you go. There you go.
All right. Do we want to open it up for any questions or?
Yeah, I think we might have some questions already in the Q&A. Do you want to go through them, Cary? Do you want me to read them? Do you want to read them?
Uh, sure, I can read them because
Okay.
hopefully they're for you mostly. This is an anonymous attendee, as the Northwoods Tony Hillerman. By the way, I want to say congratulations on getting your face, your visage sketched in the New York Times. That was quite a good Q&A of you. As the Northwoods Tony Hillerman, have you considered doing any screenplays so we can see Cork at the movies?
You know, I myself have no interest in writing a screenplay, but there has been a great deal of work done across the 21 years now that Cork's been out there to attempt to bring Cork to both the big screen and to our television screens. Nothing yet for the Cork O'Connor series, but I am in constant communication with various producers who want to make Cork a television series at this point. I'll let you know if anything happens on that front. Ordinary Grace, there's currently a screenplay. It's under contract. There's a screenplay being written for that as a multi-episode program for one of the streaming platforms. We have been in negotiation with a number of production companies for the rights to this tender land. We haven't settled on anything yet, but we'll see. And I wrote a short story a few years ago called The Painted Smile, which was, I was asked to contribute to an anthology of stories that were inspired by Sherlock Holmes. So I wrote a short story called The Painted Smile, which is about a child psychologist in St. Paul who is treating a 10-year-old kid who believes he's a 10-year-old genius who believes he's Sherlock Holmes. And I had a young member of a production company in Hollywood love that story and ask if he could have the rights to make a television series out of it. And this kid has gone to town. He's got like 3 or 4 or 5 seasons of episodes planned out. And he keeps me informed how everybody here loves it. We're looking for the way to do it, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, I remember that story. That story was anthologized in the best mystery short stories of 2018 or something.
Right, right.
Yeah. Have you considered writing a story set in South Dakota and incorporating the rich Native American spirituality there connected to place such as Bear Butte, Black Elk Peak, and the Black Hills in general?
Do you know, I have not, because that's really kind of outside my purview. I feel comfortable dealing with Minnesota, with both the Dakota and southern Minnesota here, and the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe in northern Minnesota. Once I get into South Dakota, I don't know that very well. And there are many writers over there who are doing wonderful stuff with that. David Weidman, who is a member of the Singwa, I think that's how you pronounce it, Singwa, Lakota people, came out with just a terrific mystery novel this year, set on essentially the Pine Ridge. I think it's Pine Ridge. So he's at work there. You have lots of just marvelous Native writers actually writing out of the Dakotas. You have a great guy out of Minnesota who sets his work in South Dakota, a guy named Kent Myers, Twisted Tree, and Oh, he has a novel with wolf in the title that's just a great novel. So there are plenty of people doing the Dakotas without me, honing in on their territory.
You've kind of talked a little bit around this, and I don't think there is, but was there any connection between any of the characters in Lightning Strike and This Tender Land? I noticed the mention of the Native American school in Southwest Minnesota.
Yeah, no real connection except that the backgrounds overlap, because when you're talking about any Native community here in Minnesota, and you're talking about the past for so many of the Native people involves time in horrific time in one of the boarding schools. Horrific for many. There are those who didn't have such a terrible experience. There were a variety of experiences, but probably the preponderance of experiences were not good. So that's just the overlap there. I have, Henry Malou. In his backstory, he was in the Native American boarding school in Flandreau, South Dakota. He ran away when he was a kid and never went back. He went into the Boundary Waters and learned, how to survive in the wilderness. And his growth as a Mide kind of came from that.
Like Big John. That's what Big
Like
John.
Big John, which is why one of the reasons probably Henry took him into the Boundary Waters. It's a place for healing.
Mm-hmm. How did you choose Aurora, Minnesota as the home base of Cork?
Okay, I get this a lot. There's a lot of confusion about Aurora, Minnesota, but only because only on the part of those who know the Arrowhead and know that there is a real Aurora, Minnesota there. So with my first novel, Iron Lake, the town was not called Aurora at that point. It was called Wendigo. But as was the novel at that point, the actual title of the novel was not Iron Lake, it was Wendigo. The town was Wendigo, and there was the significant myth of that mythic creature, the Wendigo, running through the story. And my publisher said, too many Wendigos. Can you change the name of the town? So I said, well, I guess I can change the name of the town. And, I was looking for a name that for me would be evocative of the North Country. And, Aurora did it for me. It's so north, the Aurora Borealis. And so I contacted my editor at Simon & Schuster and I said, I think I want to call my town Aurora, but there's already a real Aurora, Minnesota up there, not really very far from where I imagine my Aurora being. Can I do that? And he thought for a moment, he said, well, as long as you don't get us sued, you go right ahead. So I changed it to Aurora. And, just a few weeks after Iron Lake came out, I got an email that went something like this. Dear Mr. Krueger, greetings from the real Aurora, Minnesota. It was from the librarians up there. They said, we have your book. We think you've done a wonderful job. I went up to visit Aurora, the real Aurora, not long after that, and visited with the librarians. And at one point, the head librarian took me into the stacks, and she pulled down Iron Lake off the shelf, and she said, when any of our clients come in and they're not sure what to read, we always recommend Iron Lake. She said, invariably, when they bring the book back, they go, we want to live in this Aurora. So, if I had to change anything at all about the series, I would rename the town. I would have named the town something like North Star. So it wasn't so confusing for people who know the real Aurora, Minnesota.
And you had not been up to the real Aurora before you created the fiction with Sam's Place and Iron Lake and all that. You had been up.
I had been. And, Aurora is a perfectly wonderful little community, but there's not a big lake there. There's not a Native American reservation there. There is not a route. There's an A&W there, but it's not Sam's Place.
And probably
my Aurora, for anyone who's interested, I was trying to create a town that would be an amalgam of so many of the elements of the Northwoods towns that I have come to know and love, because I never wanted anybody to say, oh, this is definitely Ely, or this is definitely Babbitt, or this is definitely Virginia, you name it. I wanted them to clearly see that it's a Northwoods town. Yeah, I know that place, but not be able to locate it geographically specifically,
Yeah, I actually like that. I actually like how that's laid down in Lightning Strike with Iron Lake, and part of Iron Lake is in the reservation, part of it is in the Boundary Waters, and and getting up to Moose Lake through Spider Creek is, I like all that, and then you come back to the Aurora civilization and stuff. It's a nice setting. Will you ever consider bringing some of your characters from past books back so we can see how their life has progressed? There are so many rich characters. I miss them. My list is long.
Do you know, I have created a lot of characters who've just made a 1-book appearance in the stories or 2-book appearance in the stories. And then they're out, and I get requests to bring them back and find out what's happening with them, because readers in those book or 2 came to enjoy them, appreciate them, really like them. And maybe, life is long. It's been a long, in the early part of the series, Rose, Cork's sister-in-law, was an important character. She went off and she married Mal Thorne, and I haven't dealt with Rose for a while. I'd like to bring Rose and Mal back. They have a child. I'd like to include them again. Annie, Cork's youngest daughter, has been gone for quite a while. I haven't really featured her in a story for maybe 3 or 4 books. I'd like to bring her back. So I'm trying to figure out, in not the next book because it's already finished, but the book after that in the Cork O'Connor series, a way to bring so many of these characters back to Aurora in a very natural, believable way. So we'll see if that happens. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, but as long as I am on the subject, I'm working on the revisions to the next book in the Cork O'Connor series. It will probably be called Anger Bay, and it will be out this time next year. And for those of you who have followed the Cork O'Connor series up through Desolation Mountain, you may remember in Desolation Mountain, I left Henry Malou in a rather precarious situation. And I didn't let the reader know Henry's fate. In this next book, Anger Bay, you will find out Henry's fate.
Okay, that will be number 19.
19.
Have you gone up to so far as ideas for 20, 21, 22?
No, I have 2 more books under contract. There will be beyond Anger Bay. There will still be 2 more books under contract in the series. But before I get to those books, I will create the next standalone novel that will be a companion to both Ordinary Grace and This Tender Land. I've already begun work on that. And as soon as I finish the revisions for Anger Bay, I'll return to that project. And then I'll start thinking about what will the next Cork O'Connor story include.
Yeah, the pace is usually approximately 1 per year, sometimes less, but sometimes more.
Every once in a while, I've skipped a year for one reason or another, but pretty much commercial speed in New York City for the crime genre is a book a year. That's what publishers expect of you. And I, generally speaking, since my 3rd novel. So my first novel, Iron Lake, took me 4 years to write. My second novel, Boundary Waters, took me 2 years to write. My third novel, Purgatory Ridge, took me 1.5 years to write. And then my publisher called me out to New York City and sat me down and said, Kent, we want to make a big author out of you. But if we're going to do that, we have to be assured that you'll give us a book a year. I crapped my pants. And then I decided, yeah, I want to be a big author. I can do that. And, Cary, when I write a Cork O'Connor story, I'm not recreating the wheel. I already have my characters in mind. I already have the setting that readers are familiar with. Readers know the elements that are going to be included in the story. So I can produce, it's not difficult for me to produce a good story in about 8 months.
Good for you. Thunder Bay was a story mostly about Henry Malou. So now, will he be in Anger Bay? You just kind of talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, Henry's in Anger Bay, but that's all I'm going to say about Henry in Anger Bay. What happens to Henry in Anger Bay, I will say nothing about.
Okay. Now, there are no more questions, but I have one last question. Just okay. Curiosity, being a writer. What is your writing practice? Do you wake up in the morning? I think I've asked you this before. And I think it's shifted over time. You used to go down to the St. Clair broiler, and you'd go there in the morning when it opened up, and you'd write there all morning, and then you got away from that, I think. What is your practice? Do you wake up in the morning? No?
I still wake up in the morning at 6 o'clock before the pandemic made us shelter in place. I would get myself dressed and I would go to the coffee shop where I would spend 2 to 3 hours writing every day, 7 days a week. That has always been my process. Once the pandemic set in and we had to shelter in place, I exchanged my kitchen counter for the coffee shop, and found that I could still be productive. I like the noise of honestly, I like the noise of a coffee shop. The house is a little too quiet for me. But if you have a contractual obligation, if you've got a deadline to meet, you do what you have to do to get the story written. So I am writing at home. As soon as I feel like it's really safe to return to coffee shops and be in close proximity with people, I'll go back to the coffee shop. I feel really comfortable writing there.
Good. Please do. We really appreciate your work. And I think that's it. Is there anything else you want to cover?
No, I just want to say, Cary, I just so love talking to you because our conversations are just a lot of fun, and everything goes back and forth very naturally. And I just want to encourage everybody out there to buy one of Cary's books. Not only is he just a wonderful guy, he is a wonderful writer. You will, I guarantee, love his work.
Thank you, Ken. And if you haven't bought this yet, go out and get this book. This is, again, I've saved the Cork O'Connor, so I'm going to work my way through all the rest of them. I read several of them, but I really like this. This is my favorite so far, I have to say.
I've been getting that from a lot of people, and I think, who doesn't like a coming of age story, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, and yeah, you handled that beautifully. Thank you, Miigwech.
You are quite welcome. And here's Riley back with us.
All right. So thank you both so much. I knew pairing you guys together was going to be a great combination. So I'm glad you guys were able to have this with us today. Everybody, like I said before, at the end of the event, you will be redirected to the Next Chapter Bookseller's website. You could buy a copy of Lightning Strike if you haven't done that yet. You could also get a copy of Wolf Kill if you have already read Lightning Strike and need something new to look at. Also, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter. If you have not gotten vaccinated yet, we strongly encourage that you do, because we will be checking vaccinations for events, and as we will be having some coming up in store, which we are very excited about. So we hope that we will be able to see you guys all there. Please follow our social media for updates. We will keep you all informed, and yes, thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
One more thing, Riley. If you want signed copies of Lightning Strike, Next Chapter has plenty of them. Drop into the store and you can get a signed copy.
Yes, we do, but we only have so many signed copies, so if you haven't gotten yours yet,
I'll come back if you need more.
So we hope to see you guys all in store picking up your book or placing an order. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your week.
Take care, everyone.
Yep. See you, Ken.
Bye-bye, Cary.